And the winner is Peter Falk, Columbo. In 1973, a script landed on NBC's desk that would have shown America's favorite detective facing a killer with no motive, just pure evil. Network bosses panicked and locked it away. They said it was too dark for television. They claimed audiences weren't ready. But the real reason this Columbo episode stayed buried for 50 years was much more sinister. Today, we're exposing what they tried to hide. When Hollywood came to a grinding halt in early 1960 due to a writer's strike, two struggling screenwriters, Richard Levinson and William Link, found themselves scrambling to make ends meet. But instead of waiting it out, they found a sneaky little loophole. They realized that live TV wasn't included in the strike restrictions. So they went for it. They wrote a murder mystery called Enough Rope for NBC's new live color show, The Chevy Mystery Show. It was rushed, desperate, and they even tricked their own agent to get it sold. But in that messy little script, something incredible was born. A rumpled, odd detective named Lieutenant Columbo. They had no idea that this last-ditch effort would turn into a pop culture legend. Character wasn't even entirely original. They'd been reading Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And the detective in that book, Porfiry Petrovich, gave them the idea. A soft-spoken guy who looked harmless but was actually brilliant. That's what they wanted Columbo to be. Instead of revealing the killer at the end like most stories, they decided to show the killer right at the beginning. That way, the tension came from watching how Columbo with all his quirks and questions would slowly trap them. It was clever, fresh, and psychological, and people loved it. The first ever Columbo wasn't even Peter Falk. On July 31, 1960, the character was played by Bert Freed in a live broadcast. He did a good job, quiet, watchful, but the real magic was still years away. 2 years later, the story was turned into a play called Prescription Murder, and Thomas Mitchell played Columbo on stage. Audiences liked it, even if it never made it to Broadway. Sadly, that would be Mitchell's final role before his death. But things really changed in 1968. NBC decided to make Prescription Murder into a TV movie. And this time they cast Peter Falk. He wasn't the first choice. Lee J. Cobb and Bing Crosby both said no, but he fit the role perfectly. Falk gave Columbo something new, a strange charm mixed with razor-sharp focus. In that first movie, he was actually kind of clean-cut. His hair was neat. His suit was pressed. The famous raincoat made its debut though, and it stuck around forever. That raincoat, Falk bought it himself during a rainstorm in New York for just $15. He wore it in the movie, then kept wearing it. Turns out it wasn't just some random coat. It was actually made by a high-end Spanish company. But to Falk, it was just the right look. He even started bringing his own clothes to set. The shoes, the suits, even the car. He picked that scruffy old Peugeot himself. It all helped create a detective who felt real, not dressed up by a wardrobe team. What made Columbo even more fascinating was the way Falk played him. He wasn't just acting. He was playing mind games. Falk would improvise lines, get distracted mid-scene, and throw off the actors who were supposed to be guilty. It worked. They looked irritated, nervous, just like their characters should. He might pull out a shopping list instead of evidence or ask to borrow a pencil for no reason. These were tricks, not accidents. The actors weren't in on it, but the audience was. And that made Columbo even more fun to watch. And of course, there's the line. Just one more thing. That catchphrase, it wasn't part of some genius plan. Levinson and Link admitted they only added it because a scene was too short and they didn't want to retype it. So, they had Columbo walk back into the room and say it. And that's how TV's most famous detective move was born. What started as a lazy fix became a signature moment that usually signaled the killer's doom. The Columbo character was so unique that even his name stayed a mystery. In all those years, viewers never really knew his first name. Sometimes you could catch Frank Columbo on a blurry badge, but the creators insisted they never gave him a first name. They wanted it to stay that way. When a trivia writer named Fredworth made up Philip Columbo as a fake fact to catch copycats, and Trivial Pursuit fell for it, he actually sued them. He lost, but the myth stuck around. Even at Columbo's nephew's wedding, everyone just called him Lieutenant. Imagine going through life and your family doesn't even call you by your first name. Behind the scenes, the casting process was just as intense. Each episode had guest stars who played the killers, and the team often considered dozens of actors for those parts. For one role, they even looked at legends like Orson Welles and Peter Sellers. Sellers wanted so much money that they had to pass. Falk himself rejected some suggestions. He vetoed Danny Kaye without ever explaining why. When Columbo was first being developed in 1971, NBC executives were skeptical. Actually, they were worried television had rules back then. The hero had to show up right away or people might change the channel. But the creators of Columbo, Richard Levinson and William Link, didn't care about rules. They made the audience wait nearly 30 minutes before Columbo even showed up. That kind of delay had never been done before, and executives called it the longest stage wait in television history. They thought viewers would get bored and leave. But what happened next turned the entire detective genre on its head. Instead of a typical whodunit, the show told you right away who the killer was. That was the twist. You watched the murder happen. You saw how carefully the plan was put together. And then you sat back to see how this quiet, awkward detective would slowly tear that plan apart. People thought knowing the killer would kill the suspense, but it didn't. It made things more intense. It became a game of how he would catch them, not if he would. And Columbo didn't use guns or car chases. He used polite questions, everyday logic and an eye for tiny details like a smudge on a wine glass or a thermostat set too low. But there was something else underneath it all that made Columbo so powerful. It was about class. Columbo wasn't rich. He drove a beat-up car, wore the same wrinkled coat every day, smoked cheap cigars, and talked about his wife constantly. And the people he went after, they were surgeons, actors, CEOs, generals, people who thought they were too important to get caught. Columbo never treated them like they were special. In fact, he often made them uncomfortable. He'd ask what their expensive painting cost or mention that his wife had something similar at home just to see how they'd react. The show quietly exposed how the rich assumed they were untouchable, and Columbo made sure they weren't. At one point, NBC tried to interfere. After only a few episodes, they pushed the creators to change the format. They wanted Columbo to appear earlier, and they wanted more traditional storytelling, but the team refused. Levinson, Link, the producer, William Furman, and even Peter Falk himself all stood their ground. They said they would quit before changing the show's heart. It was a huge gamble, but it worked. Viewers loved it. Ratings climbed and the executives backed off. From the moment it premiered on September 15, 1971, Columbo was something different. It aired as part of NBC's mystery movie rotation, sharing space with other detective shows, but it quickly became the favorite. And Peter Falk's performance was a big reason why that season he won an Emmy. Over the years, he won 4 more for the role along with a Golden Globe. His messy charm and careful delivery made Columbo unforgettable. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He just asked one more thing, and suddenly everything would fall apart for the killer. NBC's rotating format gave the show longer episodes, sometimes 90 minutes, so the writers had more time to build tension and character. That breathing room made Columbo feel more like a movie than a TV show. And it worked so well that NBC moved the lineup to Sunday nights, where it dominated the ratings. Columbo was now not just a hit, but a prime-time anchor. What no one expected was just how far the show would reach. It didn't stay in the United States. It went global. Syndicated in 44 countries, it found fans everywhere. In Hungary, fans built a statue of Columbo. In Romania, people were so upset when the show ended that Peter Falk had to record a message to explain that it wasn't censored. It had just ended. Decades later, the BBC still called it timeless. It turned out that Columbo's quiet persistence, his sense of justice, and the satisfaction of seeing arrogant criminals brought down, those things mattered to people everywhere. And the guest stars, Columbo turned catching murderers into an honor. Big-name actors lined up to play the killer. Jack Cassidy did it 3 times. William Shatner did it twice. Patrick McGoohan won Emmys for his appearances. Leonard Nimoy, Robert Culp, George Hamilton, even Martin Landau played twin killers in one episode. It was a stage for talent. Even behind the scenes, the show attracted greatness. A 24-year-old Steven Spielberg directed the first regular episode. Peter Falk knew immediately this guy is too good for Columbo. In the summer of 1973, something strange happened in Hollywood. Brian De Alma, a rising director with a strong dislike for television, decided to write an episode for Columbo. This was the same De Alma who had just released Sisters, a dark thriller that proved his love for Hitchcock-style storytelling. But Columbo had impressed him so much he teamed up with his friend Jay Cox, a respected film critic, and sent in a script out of nowhere. They even used a fake name for Jay, borrowing Joseph P. Gillis from Sunset Boulevard, like they were in on a private joke. What made it even more surprising was that this all happened during a writer's strike when the show was desperate for content. De Palma, who normally looked down on TV, crossed into a world he didn't like because he saw something different in this scruffy detective show. The story they came up with was wild. A filmmaker named Quentin Lee, clearly modeled on real-life figures like Truman Capote, murders a talk show host and films the whole thing. But this wasn't just a murder.